Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell saying that the US central bank has been served grand jury subpoenas from the Justice Department threatening a criminal indictment. The move is a dramatic escalation of the Trump administration's attacks on the Federal Reserve.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation.
Now, Donald Trump insists he had no knowledge of the DOJ's investigation into the central bank. We can get more now with Bloomberg's Rosalind Mathieson. Ros, good morning. Just remind us what exactly Powell's being accused of here, and how likely is it that the Fed chair is actually ousted?
Well, this goes back to those allegations from previously about this extensive renovation of Federal Reserve buildings and the allegation potentially that Powell maybe misled Congress in his testimony about it. Of course, the Trump administration has been annoyed by the cost of this renovation, which has blown out. I mean, the Fed says it's a consequence of higher costs than expected for things like labour and materials. This is being led, obviously, by the US Attorney's Office. We know that the US Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has directed her officers to look at cases of potential taxpayer misuse. And this particular case is being run by the US Office for the District of Columbia. The question is, how long does it take for this investigation to go for? Because Powell's term as chair does end in May. Is this more about trying to make sure he leaves the Fed entirely because his time as governor isn't up until 2028? Are they trying to ensure his departure from the Fed in entirety? Of course, you saw that very robust statement from Powell saying he's being punished essentially for doing his job, the Fed essentially doing its job in trying to be independent in setting interest rates. That doesn't sound like someone who's about to back down. So potentially we're in for a really big fight here again between Powell and the administration.
And Ros, as well as the Fed decision later this month, we're also, of course, expecting the Supreme Court to take up the Lisa Cook case, and we're expecting the president to name Powell's successor. So what's the latest on all of those?
Well, that's right. Trump says he's made up his mind. We don't know. He hasn't said who, but we know that, for example, the National Economic Council chief, Kevin Hassett, is a front runner there. It was interesting to see last night that, you know, the Senator Tom Tillis from the Senate Banking Committee, he's a Republican, coming out and saying he doesn't want to push forward with any nominations until these legal matters are addressed. So perhaps does he become an obstacle for Donald Trump in getting his nominee out of committee and into a full Senate confirmation? So it's a very interesting statement to see from that senator overnight on this case. So that's going forward. Separately, as you say, we're going to get oral arguments next week in the case of Lisa Cook, who Trump has been trying to fire from the Fed over, he says, allegations of mortgage fraud, which she denies. These are oral arguments in whether Trump has the right, essentially, to fire Fed officials, including FOMC officials, for cause. She disputes that, his ability to do that, and says even if she had committed the things they say she had, they were done in a private capacity before her time at the Fed. Therefore, there can't be an issue of for cause. So we're going to get oral arguments on that next week. That's going to be very interesting to see in terms of, again, a look at just the reach and the ability and the influence potentially of this Trump White House.